to this Real America's Voice news break. I'm Terrence Bates. Thieves are stealing homes from right underneath homeowners while they're still in it. My next guest is helping protect you from being a victim, though. He's qualified to do so because he once was the crook who committed title theft and mortgage fraud. His crimes landed him on the Secret Service's most wanted list and 13 years in prison. Now, Matthew Cox is using his powers for good and serving as a public educator for Home Title Lock. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hate that that's the introduction, but that is the reality, which I think does qualify you to help protect people who might be dealing with this. Explain how it all starts. Explain how people begin to become victims.
Unfortunately, you don't actually have to do anything. You just have to own a home. And someone like myself could drive through the neighborhood, get your address, look up your address on public records. They could create a transfer of deed or a warranty deed in their name, file the deed, and then they can sell your house or borrow against your house. Even if you have a mortgage on the house, if the victim had a mortgage on their house, I would simply create a satisfaction of mortgage from their mortgage company, and now they don't have a mortgage. I would transfer the title out of the true homeowner's name into someone else's name, and then I could refinance the house or sell the house or do pretty much whatever I wanted to the house, even if the homeowner was in the house.
You know, as I'm listening to you describe how people would become victims to this sort of crime, the thing that comes to mind is there've got to be some sort of safeguards in place to keep this from happening. Someone shouldn't just be able to go into the county recorder's office, forge all these documents without some sort of check from the county recorder's office to safeguard me as a potential victim.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? You would think that's how it's supposed to work, but it just doesn't. The information is available online. Anybody can go search the information, get the information. They can apply for a mortgage. You do not get notified. The only way you would get notified as a homeowner that there was a change to your title or that this crime is being committed is if you had your title monitored by a service. That service would notify you.
And that's where Home Title Lock comes in, correct?
Absolutely. Home Title Lock is a company that I work with. They're amazing. And what I like about them is that they do a lot more than just notify you. Once they notify you, they'll hire an attorney that will actually protect you and work for you in order to correct any problems that have occurred. So if someone like me comes along and takes out 3 mortgages on your house and borrows $500,000 on your house, Home Title Lock will help you with the authorities, with public records. They'll file the paperwork. They'll do the whole court proceedings to correct that, that type of situation as far as your title is concerned. Because let's face it, if you're some guy that works a regular job, you don't know how to fix this.
And how long does the process typically take to get your name and your title back, if you will?
It depends on the court. It could be 90 days. It could be a year. It depends on the court, what county you're in. The important thing is to be able to be notified and have an advocate on your side to help you kind of weather the storm and get through the process. Because a lot of people think the law enforcement will do that. The law enforcement is ill-equipped typically to handle this situation, unfortunately.
Since you were on the inside, you were an inside man, if you will, on these crimes, put into perspective for us how prevalent this kind of thing is. Is this kind of a one-off, it's something unique, or is this something that we're seeing happen daily, really quickly, 30 seconds?
Yeah. So it's funny when I was doing it, it was a very rare crime, but in the last decade or two, it has absolutely exploded, and it is happening all of the time. And it is much easier of a crime to commit now than it was 15 years ago when I was doing it.
All right. Well, we appreciate your expertise. Thanks for being here with us, folks. All the information you need is right there on your screen. HometitleLock.com.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025, and here are three big things you need to know. 1. Ukraine and the United States have signed a minerals agreement. Comes almost 2 months after a White House meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky derailed talks on that deal. Zelensky had declined to sign the previous proposals for that deal, which requires Ukraine to relinquish a share of its future oil, gas, and revenue minerals in exchange for continued U.S. support. 2. Ford is extending its employee pricing sale until at least July 4th. Company's CEO announced the extension on Wednesday, the automaker trying to encourage sales to customers who might be nervous about rising prices because of new tariffs on imported cars and auto parts. And number 3, if you have not been following the exploits of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, well, we're going to get you up to speed this morning. The Democrat billionaire likely to run for president in 2028. He's cozying up to the AOC wing of the party. We'll hear a lot from Pritzker here in just a few moments because he's been on a roll lately. That is where we start hour one of the Steve Gruber Show. Thanks so much for being alongside. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve this morning. Always a privilege and pleasure to sit in for the great man. I am here at Hillsdale College. Our term just ended yesterday. Finals begin tomorrow. Commencement next weekend with Victor Davis Hanson giving our commencement speech next weekend. We'll be happy to see him here on campus once again. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com, where I try to corral all my media doings. You might see me filling in here. I host some podcasts for the college here, including the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Also host a show called Political Beats with my friend Jeff Blair over at National Review and wherever you find your audio. We talk with people in politics about their favorite band or musical artist. Ton of fun. Just released Brian Eno this week. That's an interesting episode. And then also a show called Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of SNL. My co-host there, Christian Schneider, and I going back through. We watch every single episode, report to you season by season what was good, what wasn't, who was funny, who wasn't. But you can track American comedy, American history, American culture through watching a lot of what happened on that program. So that's all out there. You can find it. Really happy to be here with you today. The show, of course, SteveGruber.com and over on X at Steve Gruber Show. All right, this hour, after the bottom of the hour, we'll talk with Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist, about the danger of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and that wing of the party, and might she be a danger in the presidential race for 2028. Before we get to AOC, we have to talk about a politician who is embracing the hard left AOC wing of the party as he makes a potential run for president in 2028. And that's Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. I don't know how closely you've been following him, if you even know of him, have heard his name. He's been out there this week because of something he said. That's like low on the list here. We've got to go back in time here. J.B. Pritzker, I was born and bred in Illinois, as you might know, moved to Michigan about 10 years ago, and so I'm still very in tune with Illinois politics. J.B. Pritzker is a billionaire. J.B. Pritzker has been governor of Illinois now for almost 8 years. He's not made a decision whether or not he'll run for re-election or perhaps go whole hog into the presidential race. We shall see. But he's definitely interested and is definitely making an attempt to run for the nomination, at least trying to position himself to make a run for the nomination. And in doing so, he is embracing some of the hardest left elements of his party. And we're going to hear a lot of audio here this morning. One of the overarching points is, if this were a Republican, there would be breaking news coverage on CNN every time he spoke. There'd be primetime town hall specials about how J.B. Pritzker, the Republican, is saying things that are tearing apart a republic and perhaps inciting violence. But he's not. He's a Democrat with eyes in the White House. He's a billionaire, and so the media doesn't lay a glove on him. We're going to tell you, show you what he's been saying and why it perhaps should be quite concerning to you. We gotta go back a couple of months. If you were with me, one of the last times I filled in, we talked about this. J.B. Pritzker, at his budget address this year for Illinois, which was a couple of months ago, he decided to talk about the Trump administration just after President Trump took the oath of office a second time, and compared Donald Trump and the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, pretty much straight out. So we'll hear a bit here. This is J.B. Pritzker during the budget address a couple of months in Illinois on Donald Trump and Nazis. Cut one.
I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly, but I know the history intimately and have spent more time than probably anyone in this room with people who survived the Holocaust. Here's what I've learned. The root that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation and looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now.
Everyday Germans mad about inflation looking for someone to blame. Making that direct comparison to you, everyday Americans, mad about inflation looking for someone to blame. J.B. Pritzker is very concerned you're going to turn into a Nazi. He's not done. 6 different times in this budget address, he compared Trump to not invoke Nazis 6 different times in making this comparison between the Trump administration and the Nazi regime. Cut 2 here from J.B. Pritzker.
What comes next? After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next? All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it.
All the atrocities in human history come for the question, what comes next? He thinks we're at that moment of what comes next. He thinks that you and I and others who support Donald Trump are going to be led into a Nazi regime, led to support a Nazi regime. This is what J.B. Pritzker thinks is happening across the country and why you supported Donald Trump for president. One more cut here from the budget address. We'll come back and hear more from J.B. Pritzker. He doesn't stop here. This is J.B. Pritzker again, budget address a couple of months ago, governor of Illinois, cut 3.
If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
All right, that's J.B. Pritzker. I don't know if he has a countdown on his desk. 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours. Well, by this point, we've passed that mark in the Trump administration, and so maybe Pritzker's breathing a bit easier. But he didn't stop there. He's been very much in the news the past week with more incendiary comments. We'll hear those next. Scott Bertram in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. Bertram sitting in for Steve here on this Thursday morning. Mike Hahn will join us after the bottom of the hour, a Republican strategist. We'll talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the possibility of 2028. On 2028, spending a little time this morning looking at Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat billionaire who is likely to run for president in 2028. His rhetoric is heating up very quickly. We saw his budget address a couple of months ago, actually, in which he invoked Nazi regime, comparing the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, and concerned that people who were foolish and were tricked into voting for Donald Trump because they were afraid of high inflation now were going to be wrapped up in his authoritarian fascist ways. That's where he started to position himself. Well, he started actually last year as well, but particularly this year, where he started to embrace the far left wing of the party, and that has not stopped, as you will soon hear. So he sets the table. He sets the table by saying Donald Trump is a Nazi. The Trump administration is a Nazi administration. And so what does that mean? That means virtually any kind of resistance would be appropriate because of how evil that regime is. In fact, as he would say a couple of weeks ago, the way you deal with Donald Trump is you punch him in the face. That's what the guy like Donald Trump needs. He's a Nazi, as J.B. Pritzker said during his budget address. Again, J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, likely 2028 candidate. Cut 4 here.
Never before in my life have I called for mass protests, for mobilization, for disruption, but I am now.
J.B. Pritzker, that actually is from earlier this week. I called for the wrong cut, my fault. But telling us that Republicans cannot know a moment of peace out there. They've got to be everywhere. And what does it mean to not know a moment of peace? As I mentioned previously, if you go back a couple of weeks, J.B. Pritzker saying people like Donald Trump need to be punched in the face. Cut 5 here.
Bending to the whims of a bully will not end his cruelty. It will only embolden him. The response to authoritarianism isn't acquiescence. Bullies respond to one thing, and one thing only: a punch in the face.
Bullies respond to a punch in the face. Donald Trump runs a Nazi regime. Republicans shouldn't know a moment of peace. Get out there, and what do they need? They need a punch in the face. This is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and I want you to imagine a Republican saying similar things about Kamala Harris, any leading Democrat. As I said, they're the CNN primetime specials. They would turn this person into another, just say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, ostracized from polite politics, would not be referenced in a serious manner in terms of a candidate for president, but no one cares because he is a billionaire Democrat. J.B. Pritzker doesn't stop there. That cut you saw where he said no moment of peace for any Republican is from earlier in the week. 2 nights ago, Tuesday night, he was on this town hall put on by Midas Touch, which is a far-left media outlet. He was on with a couple of other governors. J.B. Pritzker on Tuesday night telling Democrats, activists, to go to the offices of Republican politicians. Cut 11.
And that, in fact, is one of the things I want to say to everybody that's listening. If you're not out there protesting in front of a Republican congressman's office, or out in the street making your voice heard, or calling your friends in another state to have them do it, or showing up in Washington, D.C. in front of their offices, those Republican congressmen, then you're not doing what's necessary to put pressure on them to vote the right way.
If you're not showing up at local district offices, if you're not showing up in Washington, D.C. and standing outside the offices of Republican politicians and not letting them know a moment of peace and maybe punching them in the face because they're part of a support system of a Nazi regime, then you're not doing enough, says Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Where will he go next? What will he say next? A responsible media would begin talking about this guy's, they'd call it a track record of a pattern of careless rhetoric. A guy who is not interested in bringing us together, but is fanning the flames of hate. This is the way he'd be referred to if he were a Republican, but he's not. He's a billionaire Democrat. And speaking of being a billionaire, he talked with Dave Weigel of Semaphore earlier this week on the topic of oligarchy, because again, he is a billionaire governor who wants to be president. He said, oligarchy is a group of the most powerful people in society who are trying to impose their will on everyone else and make them pay for what the oligarchs are unwilling to pay for. Now, this is very rich, no pun intended. J.B. Pritzker, a billionaire heir to a hotel fortune. You know what he did? He did once in Chicago? He has multiple mansions. One of his mansions, he was rehabbing. And in order to dodge taxes, J.B. Pritzker went to this mansion and took out all the toilets from the mansion. And this is, you can find this is everywhere. Took out all the toilets from his mansion so he would not have to pay the same amount of property taxes, because a home without a toilet is not considered, it's considered uninhabitable. So he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars less than he should have in property taxes simply by removing toilets from his mansion. A guy who's complaining about oligarchs who refuse to pay for things they want to impose on society. J.B. Pritzker appeals to the left. Just a short time here. Because what he's telling them is they are right, and they simply didn't fight hard enough. He's saying you don't have to change anything. You can be who you are. You can be who you want to be. You just didn't fight hard enough, and you weren't loud enough about the things you want to do to Americans across this country. That's why he's dangerous. That's why this rhetoric is dangerous. That's why you should keep a sharp eye on J.B. Pritzker as this campaign rolls on. Scott Bertram in for Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for joining us all across Michigan and across the country. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. I'm here at Hillsdale College. As I mentioned, classes came to an end yesterday. Finals start tomorrow, commencement next weekend. But you never have to stop learning from Hillsdale College, thanks to our great online courses, free online courses for you. You've heard all of it before about capitalism. Capitalism is evil. Capitalism is... Well, what even is capitalism? That's a big question. And Hillsdale College can help you understand. If everyone's talking about capitalism, perhaps you should know a thing about it and understand it. That's where Hillsdale College comes in. There's a brand new free online course, Understanding Capitalism, taught by my friend, Dr. Charles Steele, one of our great economists here on campus. In just 7 fast, fascinating lectures, you'll dive into profit and loss, human nature and freedom, and why capitalism isn't a system of greed, a system of morality and liberty. And that's just one of only 40, of almost 40 free online courses offered by Hillsdale College. There's no tuition and no strings. They're free to sign up, free to take. Take them at your own pace, whenever it's convenient for you. Go now to gruber4hillsdale.com to enroll. It's easy, free, and it's ready whenever you are. That's gruber4hillsdale.com, Gruber, F-O-R, Hillsdale.com, for all of our free online courses, including the latest one on capitalism, Understanding Capitalism with Dr. Charles Steele, available at gruber4hillsdale.com. Coming up after the break, we'll talk with Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist. Should the right be concerned? Should conservatives be concerned about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the possibility that she has the momentum and she has the energy and she is the candidate that the left might want to embrace at 2028? We'll ask him about that, and with perhaps other candidates like J.B. Pritzker will adopt the rhetoric of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the run-up to the next nomination. See, the presidential cycle never really stops, does it? Scott Bertram in for Steve. It's the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. Joined now by Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist, two-time Team Trump alum, also formerly with the NRSC as well. You can find more at frontlinestrategies.co. Mike, thanks so much for jumping on with us on the Steve Gruber Show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And if X is correct, a happy birthday to you as well.
I appreciate that. That's very nice of you. Thank you.
Talking a bit this morning about AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her influence on the Democratic Party. A lot of jockeying for position and a lot of jockeying for leadership right now among the Democrats. There's no real leader. Kamala Harris lost the election. She had a big speech last night. No one really cares. But they are looking for someone to step up and be the person who leads the party, both in terms of messaging and energy ahead of the midterms and ahead of 2028. Is AOC going to be that person for the left?
I actually didn't even have any clue that Kamala spoke last night either. But look, AOC put up a fantastic first quarter when it comes to fundraising. She did $9.6 million. I think her average donation was $20. She claims none of it was from lobbyists or corporate PACs. I mean, those are presidential level numbers. At Frontline, I work with quite a few congressmen and congresswomen on the Republican side. None of them came anywhere near putting up those types of numbers. So I think this is certainly a signal of how far left the Democrat Party is moving. The fact of the matter is she has a pulse on a base, and it's a very strong base. I mean, I'm looking also at crowds. She's pulling Trump 2016 type crowds in places like Idaho and these red areas. So she should be taken very seriously. She's no longer the laughing stock that we all thought she was just 5 years ago. She needs to be taken seriously. And with folks like David Hogg at the DNC, there's a very real possibility that she could be the nominee of the Democrat Party come 2028.
Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't, but if we decide to take AOC seriously, well, let's take a serious look at her record. Has she been effective? Has she gotten things done during her time as a member of the U.S. House?
I couldn't name one thing that she's gotten done other than create a ton of problems for the Democrat establishment and given us Republicans tons and tons of talking points. So I hope she stays around forever.
We just spent some time here on the show, Mike, talking about Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who's getting more and more unhinged in his rhetoric, comparing the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, saying that Trump's a guy that needs to be punched in the face, saying that Republicans shouldn't know a moment of peace, telling Democrats and activists to go out to Republican offices locally and go to D.C. and stand in front of offices in D.C. Is Pritzker a guy who understands? Because you've got Newsom, who's apologizing. You've got Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, who's kind of hanging out with Trump and saying, I can work with this guy. Pritzker is one of the leading candidates for 28 who seems to be embracing the kind of AOC rhetoric that says, we're right, we just have to be louder about it.
Well, he's wrong, but he's absolutely smart to be doing that because that's where the party's moving right now. Whether we like it or not, the party is moving further left. They cannot handle the fact that Donald Trump won twice. We're now in control of, obviously, all of government. They're going to continue to move left because there's a part of the Democrat Party that believes that the old plans are not working. So he's smart to do so. He probably has some pretty good advisors. I know he's a very rich guy. But here's the fact of the matter. Here's what's really interesting is that I think AOC is going to need someone like a Gretchen Whitmer on her ticket if she does run for president, because I don't think that the Democrats are going to go full-blown socialist. They're going to need someone from the Midwest to try and equalize the ticket a bit. So I would actually rather be Gretchen Whitmer as opposed to J.B. Pritzker right now, because it looks like AOC is certainly on the path to the nomination. And right now it's just a fight over who's going to be on the ticket with her.
Mike Hahn is with us, Republican strategist, more at frontlinestrategies.co. For those who might say, it's kind of overblown, the left would never nominate someone like AOC. You don't have to go that far back to see how successful Bernie Sanders was in nearly grabbing the nomination for Democrats and how successful he's been on this anti-oligarchy tour he's been doing even today. Can AOC learn and adjust from the strategies that Bernie Sanders used in his quest for the nomination?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I mean, Bernie Sanders was all but the Democrat nominee in 2016 if it wasn't for the DNC totally rigging it for Hillary Clinton. So for anyone saying it's not possible, it's entirely possible, and it's all going to come down to who's at the DNC and how far the party nationally wants to move. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the hit, but someone like David Hogg would support an AOC candidacy. That is how far the left has moved, that they put someone like him in a leadership position to make those types of decisions. So it is absolutely a real possibility. And also money talks. And if you're raising $10 million in quarter one of the off year, people are going to be paying attention to that.
Mike, what do you make of Democrats and their approach or relationship now with Chuck Schumer in the Senate? There are many who are critical of him and his acquiescence to the Trump administration with the recent budget talks, and some people called for him to step down. He's not going to do that. He might invite a challenge. Does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez first battle Chuck Schumer before perhaps making a run for the White House?
I think she has her sights on something much bigger, but I certainly don't think Chuck Schumer survives a serious challenge. I mean, I think we're looking at a Joe Biden situation there. He looks like he's in serious decline. I'm seeing these videos of Chuck Schumer, and he just looks old and out of it. So I don't think he survives a serious primary challenge, but I think AOC has her eyes set on something much, much bigger than that.
Let's look before we get to 2028, 2026. Midterms, which are right around the corner, but not that far away. Time keeps slipping into the future, as Steve Miller once said. What will Republicans learn from midterms? Meaning, we don't know how they're going to go. We might not even know what the issues are at this point. But with a midterm election like this in the middle of a Trump administration, that there cannot be a third Trump term, of course, so there's going to be an open competition for the Republican nomination in 2028. What will the midterms tell us, do you think?
Yeah, the midterms are going to tell us a lot. So the NRCC actually just came out with polling this week showing that they're in a pretty favorable spot in a lot of the districts that they're in. Obviously, the Democrat Party's approval rating is totally underwater, so that's some good news coming out of the House if you're a Republican. Look, I think the messaging from Republicans is going to be, do you want the Trump term to end 2 years early? Because if Democrats get control of either house, what they're going to do is absolutely stall his agenda. And no matter what house they get, they're going to be calling for impeachments and investigations, and it's just going to totally derail the last 2 years of the Trump presidency. So if you voted for Trump in 2024, you should vote Republican again in 2026, so you could allow him to finish out the last 2 years of his term without any type of Democrat obstruction that they're bound to do to the president.
And very quickly, Mike, we'll talk about this a bit later on in today's program, too, for our listeners. But do you think that, by and large, people who voted for Trump in November 2024 still support Trump in May of 25? Has there been anything happening that perhaps his supporters would sour on him for?
No, I think that where that's coming from is questions over the tariffs and the small economic blip right now that we might be in. But I think most Trump supporters are smart to know that, sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. I think that people elected the president on the economy. It's only been 100 days in office. Let him finish out what he needs to do, and I'm confident that by the end of his term, he will have one of the strongest economies in American history. But I certainly don't know anyone who's voted for Trump that regrets it, just anecdotally.
Mike Hahn, Republican strategist. Find him at frontlinestrategies.co, frontlinestrategies.co. And happy birthday, Mike. We appreciate you jumping on with us here on the Steve Gruber Show.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. That's Mike Hahn, again, frontlinestrategies.co. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. This is the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks so long for being with us. Thanks so much for being with us for so long. Steve is back tomorrow with you on the program. We'll hear in a bit a little bit of the 100-day cabinet meeting that Donald Trump held yesterday. Wanted to quickly play. Kamala Harris spoke last night. I told our guest Mike Hahn about that, and I'm not planning to play anything. She apparently had another great word salad moment. No one is just thirsting to hear from Kamala Harris and what she thinks about the situation. She was weighed and measured and rejected by Americans against Donald Trump in November. I know she thinks she has a future, perhaps running for president again, or maybe governor of California. Boy, I just don't know about that. And I don't think a speech like last night is going to move the needle or make her reappear on the main stage in American politics. Tim Walz thinks he does have a future, and apparently Democrats do too, because they've been sending it out on these junkets across the country. You saw him, last month talking and saying it's great that Tesla stock is going down, even though the pension funds in Minnesota owned a bunch of Tesla stock. Right, this is the kind of guy we're dealing with. Tim Walz yesterday. This is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who, by the way, I guess does some governor stuff at some point during the month, even though he's out on all these tours. Was speaking and saying, explaining why he was picked as vice president. Listen to Tim Walz explain this. Cut 10.
Look, my job was to do. Look, I knew I was on the ticket. I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
But you could be giving them permission on TV every day. You could have been messaging that way, and that isn't necessarily how it shook out.
Well, yes, but I also said I understand myself. I said I think I'll give you pretty good stuff, but I'll also give you 10% problematic. And so somebody's got to make the decision here to handle some of this stuff and to make it. And those are just decisions that were made. And I think after the fact, it is not second guessing or anything. I think it's fair to go back on and look at this. Look, we had the most qualified person who'd run for president in this country's history at the top of the ticket.
The most qualified person in this country's history at the top of the ticket. Man, that's a disqualifying statement if I ever heard one. Tim Walz, though, admitting what a failure he is. I missed it the first time I heard that cut where he says at the beginning, I was on the ticket because I could talk to white guys. I knew how to change oil on a car. I could talk football. Even though, recall, he was playing this video game with AOC and said she can run a mean pick six play, which doesn't really exist in football. Those things just kind of happen. But anyway, I was the permission structure for white guys to vote for Kamala Harris. And then in the next breath says, look, we didn't get enough of those votes. So the reason he was placed on the ticket, he admits he couldn't do the job and gather enough of those votes to actually help Kamala Harris win the presidency, and then doubles down at the end by saying, oh man, most qualified presidential nominee in our country's history is Kamala Harris. Man, oh man, Tim Walz. I hope he does stick around. Our guest Mike Hahn said he hopes AOC sticks around because it's good fodder for us on the right. And man, Tim Walz can have some fun with him and his comments if he continues to be on the national stage. Speaking of having fun, Donald Trump, the Trump administration certainly has been doing so in these first 100 days of his presidency. Yesterday, a cabinet meeting held. Elon Musk was there, not around the table, but he was at the meeting. He wore two hats. Donald Trump said he liked the fact he was wearing two hats, one on top of the other. But Donald Trump yesterday at the beginning of this meeting talking about, first of all, a little bit on the tariffs and how his administration is dealing with China right now. This is President Trump yesterday on China dealings, cut 7.
And I don't want this to happen, but I know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. I like the president a lot, President Xi. I don't want it to happen. I was actually saddened to hear it, but they are getting absolutely hammered in China. And, they're sending boats, the biggest boats in the world, carrying cargo like nobody's ever seen before. These are the biggest boats in the world, biggest cargo ships in the world. And they're coming and they're turning around in the Pacific Ocean. They're doing a big U-turn and going back because they don't want the goods, because 145% tariff. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China. We're talking to China, but their factories are closing all over China because we're not taking their product. We don't want their product unless they're going to be fair with us. And that includes intellectual property and other things.
That's a big deal, too, the intellectual property question. President Trump yesterday talking about tariff and negotiations with China. Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary at this 100-day cabinet meeting, speaking here a bit more on the effects, what's happened since some of these tariffs have been proposed and some have gone into effect. Howard Lutnick yesterday cut 8.
Investment accelerator, which gets to recruit these companies, and you've never seen anything like the companies committed to building in America. Technology companies have committed over $2.5 trillion to build in America based on your tariffs, right? Sovereign countries all backing, the whole Middle East and all these countries backing their sovereign wealth funds. They all want to invest in America, and they're coming in, again, over $3 trillion committed. So just those two topics, you're at $5.5 trillion. And then you've got the whole pharma industry knows it's got to come home because America pays for all the drugs in the world. So the pharmaceuticals have to come home, right? Autos coming home, industrials coming home. So, we've got to train, and your great Secretary of Labor together and Secretary of Education together, we're going to train the workforce to build America. It's unbelievable.
That's Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, yesterday at the 100 Days event. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by The Wellness Company. At The Wellness Company, they believe your health is your greatest asset. From natural supplements to comprehensive medical consultations, they offer doctor-developed solutions designed to support your heart, immune system, and overall well-being. If you're ready to take charge of your health journey, join their membership program. Access to 24/7 virtual care from experts, exclusive discounts, and personalized health plans. TWC.health/Gruber. TWC.health/. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Steve back tomorrow, Friday, to take you into the weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com. The show at stevegruber.com and at Steve Gruber Show on X. If you're with us in hour 2, Ed Tarnowski joins us. We'll talk a bit school choice. David Scarlett, his new film Battle at the Border, and Laura Dunn from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Every now and then you see a policy proposal or an idea and say that is a disaster waiting to happen. That is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. You go back to the mortgage-backed securities and the financial crisis in the late aughts, 08 and 09, and you look back and say, well, that was completely predictable. What did you think was going to happen? We have a student loan crisis in the country. There are far too many people owing far too much for student loans. Now, the answer is not to wipe out that debt and say it doesn't exist anymore. The answer is probably not giving out money like that to students to spend $300,000 on a degree that might not earn them much money at all. Right? It's just not smart. But if you agree to take those loans, then you should agree to pay them back. That's how this thing works. In Illinois, the state treasurer of Illinois is trying a new program called Funding You Illinois. And the idea here is that you can get a loan. It does not take into account your credit score, and you don't need a co-signer. The treasurer of the state actually says it's an attractive option for students who have maxed out their financial aid, grants, and scholarship opportunities. So you have a program here designed to hand money over at interest rates of 8 to 10% to students, not looking at their credit score, meaning not looking at their ability to pay back the loan, and not demanding that the person taking the loan have a co-signer or someone who says, yes, I'll make sure this loan is paid back. This is one of those policies. This is a recipe for disaster. This is a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Just handing out money to people to go to college without taking into account their ability to pay any of it back. Bad idea. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show.